Before we start, if you're into real stories from classified government operations, the facilities everyone's heard of but nobody understands, the cover stories that lasted decades, the things we found by accident while doing something else entirely, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like if you want more stories from nuclear test sites, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it there. Now, what I'm about to share happened at the Nevada test site between 1991 and 1993, and it's the reason nuclear testing really stopped. Let's get into it. My name is Zoey Matthews, and in August 1991, I was assigned to what the CIA officially calls Nuclear Verification Operations at the Nevada test site. For those who don't know, the Nevada test site is about 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas, 1,360 square miles of desert, where the United States conducted 928 nuclear weapons tests between 1951 and 1992. Most people think about Area 51 when they think about classified Nevada facilities. But Area 51 is aircraft testing. The Nevada test site is where we detonated atomic bombs. Above ground until 1963, then underground after that. Craters visible from space, radiation levels that will take thousands of years to decay, and security so tight that even today, most of it remains restricted. I was CIA Special Activities Division, which meant I did work that couldn't be officially acknowledged. My cover at the test site was Verification Specialist, someone who confirmed that our nuclear tests complied with various treaties and agreements. The Threshold Test Ban Treaty, the Peaceful Nuclear Explosions Treaty, all the diplomatic paperwork that let us keep testing while claiming we were working toward disarmament. But that wasn't my real job. My real job was damage control, because in 40 years of nuclear testing we'd found things, and some of those things couldn't be explained, couldn't be disclosed, couldn't be acknowledged without revealing secrets that went beyond nuclear weapons. I arrived at the test site in August 1991, just as the political landscape was shifting. The Soviet Union was collapsing, the Cold War was ending, and pressure was mounting to stop nuclear testing entirely. Congress was debating a moratorium. Environmental groups were protesting. The justification for continued testing was evaporating. My supervisor at Langley had been blunt during my briefing. The moratorium is probably coming. When it does, when we stop testing, we need to make sure certain facilities remain secure. Certain discoveries remain contained. What kind of discoveries? I asked. The kind that nuclear explosions accidentally exposed, the kind that we've been monitoring for 30 years, the kind that, if testing stops, might become a problem. He didn't elaborate, just sent me to Nevada with credentials that gave me access to areas most test site personnel didn't know existed. The Nevada test site is massive. Most people only know about the famous spots, Frenchman Flat, where they did the atmospheric tests in the 1950s, Sedan crater that's 1,280 feet across and visible from space. But there are hundreds of other locations. Shafts drilled thousands of feet into the desert floor, tunnels carved into mountains, underground chambers where bombs were detonated to study their effects. And beneath some of those test areas, we'd found things that weren't supposed to be there. My first week, I was given access to classified documentation from 1963. The year we stopped atmospheric testing and moved everything underground. The official reason was the Partial Test Ban Treaty, concerns about radioactive fallout, international pressure, environmental damage. But there was another reason. Something we'd discovered during a test that year. Something the atmospheric explosions had been affecting in ways we didn't understand until it was almost too late. The test was called Sedan, a 104-kiloton thermonuclear device detonated 635 feet below the surface on July 6, 1962. It created that massive crater I mentioned, but it also did something else. It broke through into a void space about 2,000 feet below ground, a massive cavern system that geological surveys hadn't detected because it was shielded by unusual mineral deposits. The blast opened a pathway between the surface and that deep cavern network, and something came out of those caverns. My second week, I met Dr. Robert Kane, the weapons physicist who'd been at the test site since 1965. He was 68 years old, scheduled to retire in 6 months, and he was one of only 12 people who knew the full truth about what we'd found. "Matthews," he said when we met in his office deep beneath the Nevada desert, "you're the new handler." Third one I've worked with. The first one retired in 1978. The second one had a breakdown in 1985. Let's see how long you last. "That's encouraging," I said. "It's not meant to be. What you're about to see, what you're about to learn, it's not something human minds were meant to process. We've had good people quit, good people go crazy, good people simply refuse to accept what's real. I'm telling you this now so you can still walk away." "I don't walk away," I said. "Then follow me." He led me deeper underground, through security checkpoints that required retinal scans and codes that changed daily. We descended maybe 1,500 feet, well below any official test chamber, into sections of the facility that didn't appear on any map. In 1963, Kane explained as we walked, after the Sedan test opened those caverns, we detected unusual readings, radiation levels that didn't match the test parameters, energy signatures that shouldn't exist, and movement. Something was moving in those caverns, and it was coming toward the surface. "What kind of something?" I asked. "We didn't know. Still don't, not entirely. But we needed to contain it, to study it, so we built this facility." Officially, it's a geological monitoring station studying the long-term effects of underground nuclear tests. Really, it's a containment facility. We reached a final door. Heavy steel, multiple locks, hazmat warnings. Kane entered a long code and the door unsealed. Beyond was an observation chamber overlooking a massive underground space. And in that space, illuminated by industrial lighting, was something I couldn't immediately comprehend. It looked like crystal at first. Massive formations of what seemed like mineral growth spreading across the floor and walls of the cavern like frozen lightning. But the crystals were moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely growing. Spreading. And they were glowing with a faint blue-green light that hurt to look at directly. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "We call it the substrate," Kane said, "because that's what it is. The substrate layer beneath all our existence, the foundation that reality is built on. And somehow, our nuclear tests exposed it, cracked through the normal layers of matter and revealed this. You're saying nuclear explosions broke through to what? Another dimension? Not exactly. Think of it as layers. Normal matter, the stuff we interact with every day, is the top layer. But there are deeper layers, more fundamental states of existence that underlie everything. The substrate is one of those layers. And our bombs, specifically the radiation, the energy release, created cracks that let it seep through. I stared at the growing crystal formations. And it's been doing this since 1963? Yes. Feeding on radiation, growing, spreading through the underground cavern system. We've been monitoring it for 30 years. And here's the problem, Matthews. Here's why you're here. He pulled up data on monitors, charts showing growth rates, radiation absorption levels, expansion patterns. The substrate feeds on radiation. All those nuclear tests we did, 928 explosions over 40 years, Every one of them fed it, made it stronger. We thought we were studying nuclear weapons effects. Really, we were feeding something that should have stayed buried at the foundation of reality. How big is it? I asked. The main growth occupies approximately 40 cubic miles of subsurface caverns. It's directly beneath the test site, spreading in all directions. And it's been growing steadily for 30 years, fed by constant radiation from our tests. But we're stopping testing, I said. Congress is pushing for a moratorium. Exactly. And that's the problem. The substrate has become dependent on regular radiation input. We've been feeding it for 3 decades. Now, we're about to stop. And when we do, it'll look for other sources, I finished. Kane nodded grimly. We estimate it's expanding at about 1 mile per year. In 30 more years, it'll reach Las Vegas, a city of 500,000 people, full of electrical systems, power plants, energy infrastructure. And if the substrate reaches that much concentrated power, he didn't need to finish. I understood. If this thing fed on radiation and energy, and we stopped providing it with controlled nuclear tests, it would spread toward the nearest available energy source, which was Las Vegas, sitting 65 miles away, completely unaware of what was growing beneath the desert. Why hasn't anyone stopped it? I asked. If you've known about this for 30 years, we tried, Kane interrupted. Multiple containment methods, concrete barriers, lead shielding, chemical treatments. Nothing works. The substrate isn't physical matter in any normal sense. It exists at a more fundamental level. You can't block it with material barriers because it's literally beneath the material plane. Then how do you slow it? Radiation, specifically controlled doses of nuclear radiation. Every test we've done since 1963 has provided energy that satisfies the substrate's growth needs. It absorbs the radiation, processes it, uses it to expand at a controlled rate. But if we stop feeding it, if the moratorium happens and we can't do tests anymore, it'll start seeking out other energy sources, I said, spreading faster toward population centers. Correct, and here's the worst part. Kane pulled up more data. The substrate doesn't just feed on energy, it converts it, changes it into more of itself. Any radiation that touches it becomes part of it, which means if it reaches Las Vegas, if it starts feeding on power plants and electrical grids, it'll grow exponentially, I said. Convert the entire energy infrastructure into more substrate growth. Within weeks, maybe months, it would spread across Nevada, maybe further. And there's no way to stop it because we can't destroy what exists at the substrate level of reality. We can only try to manage it, control its growth, keep it satisfied with regular feedings. I looked at the glowing crystal formations spreading across the cavern floor. So, nuclear testing wasn't really about weapons development. It was about feeding this thing. Both, Kane said. The weapons research was real. But after 1963, after we discovered the substrate, every test had a secondary purpose. Provide enough radiation to keep it from spreading uncontrollably. And now that purpose is about to end. I spent the next 3 months studying everything about the substrate, reading 30 years of classified research, reviewing data from every test conducted since 1963, understanding the full scope of what we were dealing with. The more I learned, the more disturbing it became. The substrate wasn't just growing beneath Nevada. Similar formations had been detected at other nuclear test sites around the world. The Soviet Union's Semipalatinsk site in Kazakhstan, the French testing grounds in Algeria, the Chinese facility at Lop Nor. Everywhere humans had detonated nuclear weapons underground, we'd apparently cracked through to this deeper layer of reality and exposed the substrate. And every country that discovered it had done the same thing. Kept testing, kept feeding it. kept it contained through regular radiation input. It's a global problem, Kane told me during one late-night briefing. Multiple substrate growths at different test sites, all of them dependent on regular nuclear feeds. The Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963 wasn't about environmental concerns. It was about coordination, all the nuclear powers secretly agreeing to stop atmospheric tests and move underground, so we could feed the substrate formations without public knowledge. Does the public know? I asked. Has this ever been disclosed? Never. How could we? We accidentally cracked open the foundation of reality with nuclear weapons, and now we have to keep detonating bombs to prevent something worse from happening. That's not a disclosure any government can make. But the moratorium is coming, I said. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War is over. There's no justification for continued testing. I know. Which is why you're here. Your job is to figure out how we handle the substrate when testing stops. The moratorium was announced in October 1992. The United States would cease all nuclear testing, effective immediately. Environmental victory, arms control achievement, international cooperation. All the headlines celebrated it. None of them mentioned what we'd been feeding beneath the Nevada desert for 30 years. I watched the substrate monitoring data in the weeks after the last test. At first, nothing changed. The growth continued at its normal rate, sustained by residual radiation from decades of testing. But then, slowly, the growth patterns started shifting. The substrate was spreading faster, not dramatically, but measurably. It was seeking new energy sources. How long until it reaches populated areas? I asked Kane. Hard to say. Current expansion rate suggests 20 to 30 years before it reaches Las Vegas suburbs. But if it encounters significant power infrastructure before then, electrical substations, solar farms, anything with concentrated energy, it could accelerate. Can we do anything? Kane was quiet for a long moment. Then, there's one option. It's dangerous, probably insane, and it'll require authorization from the highest levels. But it might work. What option? We feed it something else. Not nuclear radiation, but energy from another source. If we can find an energy signature it accepts, we might be able to redirect its growth, keep it away from population centers. What kind of energy source? I asked. That's what we need to figure out. The substrate responds to radiation because radiation is energetic decay, matter converting to energy at a fundamental level. But there might be other energy signatures that work. Electromagnetic fields, plasma discharges, maybe even controlled lightning strikes. And if we can't find an alternative, Kane's expression was grim. Then in 30 years, Las Vegas experiences a catastrophic event that nobody will be able to explain or stop. The substrate will reach the city's power grid, feed on it, grow exponentially. Within months, maybe weeks, it'll spread across the entire Southwest, and we'll have no way to contain it because we gave up the one tool that worked. I reported back to Langley, explained the situation, outlined Kane's proposal for alternative energy feeding, requested authorization to begin research into substrate containment methods that didn't require nuclear testing. The response came back 3 weeks later, classified above top secret, delivered by courier to Kane's underground office. The message was brief. Proposal denied. Substrate containment is not a priority. Facility will maintain monitoring protocols until growth reaches critical threshold. No further action authorized at this time. Kane read it and laughed bitterly. They're kicking the can down the road, letting it be someone else's problem. In 20 years, when the substrate reaches Las Vegas, nobody currently in government will still be in power. They'll be retired, dead, or far away from the consequences. So we just wait? I asked. Wait for it to become a catastrophe? "Unless you have another idea," Kane said. And that's when I made a decision that probably ended my career but might save a city. "What if we don't wait for authorization?" I said. "What if we start researching alternative energy sources anyway? Unofficial project, off the books, using test site resources that officially don't exist." Kane stared at me. "That would be a direct violation of orders. Career ending at minimum. Possibly criminal. But it might work. It might give us a solution before the substrate becomes unstoppable." Kane was quiet, considering. Then he smiled. "I'm retiring in 3 months. What are they going to do? Fire me twice? Let's do it." We spent the next 2 years researching alternative energy sources that might satisfy the substrate's needs. Used equipment and resources at the test site that weren't officially being monitored since testing had stopped. Conducted experiments in sections of the underground facility that only a handful of people knew existed. We tried everything: high-voltage electrical discharges, intense electromagnetic fields, plasma containment, even experimental particle accelerators built with components scavenged from decommissioned weapons research. Nothing worked. The substrate accepted the energy but didn't slow its growth. It wanted radiation. Specifically, nuclear radiation. Nothing else satisfied it. And the growth was accelerating. The expansion rate had increased from 1 mile per year to nearly 2 miles per year. We had 15 years, maybe less, before it reached populated areas. "We're running out of time," Kane said during one late-night session in December 1993. "And we're running out of options. If we can't find an alternative energy source, if we can't slow the growth..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. We both knew what it meant. Millions of people living in Las Vegas and the surrounding areas, completely unaware that something was spreading beneath them. Something that would reach them eventually. Something that couldn't be stopped with conventional methods. "There's one more option," I said. "But it's nuclear, and it would require us to break the moratorium." Kane looked up. "You're suggesting we resume testing? Secretly? Underground? In areas so remote and secure that nobody would detect it? Just enough to feed the substrate, keep it from spreading toward population centers? That's insane. The political fallout, if it was discovered, would be less catastrophic than the alternative, than letting the substrate reach Las Vegas unchecked." Kane was quiet, thinking. Then he pulled out a secure phone I'd never seen before. "I need to make a call to someone who might actually have the authority to authorize what you're suggesting." He made the call, spoke for 20 minutes in carefully coded language. Hung up. "We have a meeting," he said, "tomorrow, with someone from the Defense Department's Special Access Programs. If anyone can authorize covert nuclear testing to feed an interdimensional growth, it's them. And if they say no," I asked, "then we decide how far we're willing to go to prevent a catastrophe nobody else believes is coming." The meeting happened in a bunker beneath the test site that I didn't know existed, and I had access to areas most people didn't. This was deeper, older. Built during the height of Cold War paranoia when we thought nuclear war was inevitable. The man from Defense Department Special Access Programs introduced himself only as Wilson. No first name, no rank, no agency affiliation beyond those 3 letters, SAP. "Dr. Kane, Agent Matthews," he said, sitting across from us in a room that probably hadn't been used in decades. "I've read your reports. I've reviewed the substrate monitoring data, and I've consulted with people who make decisions about things that officially don't exist. Here's where we are." He pulled out a folder marked with classification levels I'd never seen before. The substrate problem isn't unique to Nevada. As you know, similar formations exist at test sites globally. The Soviet collapse complicated matters. Their Semipalatinsk site in Kazakhstan is now in a newly independent country that doesn't have the resources or knowledge to maintain containment. The Chinese and French sites are still under control, but barely. How bad is it? I asked. Semipalatinsk substrate growth has accelerated dramatically since the Soviets stopped testing in 1989. It's expanded 50 miles in 4 years. Current projections show it reaching the city of Semi, population 300,000, within 8 to 10 years. Kane's face went pale. My God, 300,000 people. And that's just one site, Wilson continued. We're facing similar timelines at multiple locations worldwide. The moratorium solved a political problem but created an existential one. We stopped feeding these growths, and now they're all seeking alternative energy sources simultaneously. Can we resume testing? I asked, covertly. Wilson was quiet for a moment. That's why I'm here. To discuss options that don't officially exist and can never be acknowledged. Matthews, Kane, what I'm about to propose is illegal under international treaty, domestic law, and probably several moral frameworks. If you're not comfortable proceeding, you can leave now and forget this conversation. Neither of us moved. Good, Wilson said. Here's the situation. We can't publicly resume testing. The political cost is impossible. But we might be able to conduct extremely covert operations. Small yield devices, deep underground, in locations so remote and secure that detection is unlikely. How small? Kane asked. Sub-kiloton, maybe 500 tons of TNT equivalent. Just enough to provide the radiation the substrate needs without creating detectable seismic events. That's barely enough energy, Kane said. The substrate has been feeding on multi-kiloton detonations for decades. A sub-kiloton test might not satisfy it. Then we do multiple tests. Small yields, frequent schedule. Feed it gradually rather than in large bursts. How frequently? I asked. We're estimating 1 test every 6 months. 2 per year, scheduled to coincide with periods of high ambient seismic activity that can mask the signatures. For how long? Kane asked. Wilson's expression was grim. Indefinitely. Or until we develop alternative containment methods. Whichever comes first. The covert testing program began in March 1994, codenamed Operation Substrate, though even that name was classified beyond normal channels. The first test was a 450-ton device buried 3,000 feet beneath a remote section of the test site. We conducted it during a minor earthquake swarm that provided natural seismic noise to mask the detonation signature. The test worked. The substrate absorbed the radiation, slowed its expansion rate. Not completely. It was still growing, still spreading. But the acceleration stopped. It stabilized at approximately 2 miles per year rather than the 4 miles per year it had been approaching. It's not enough, Kane said after analyzing the data. We've slowed it, but not stopped it. At this rate, it still reaches Las Vegas suburbs in 15 years. Then we need more frequent tests, I said. That increases detection risk, Wilson countered during our next secure communication. Every test is a roll of the dice. Eventually, someone will notice. Seismologists, international monitors, environmental groups. The more we test, the more likely we are to be discovered. And if we don't test enough, Kane asked, the substrate reaches population centers. What's worse, being discovered conducting covert tests or failing to prevent a catastrophic event. Wilson was quiet. I'll authorize quarterly tests, 4 per year. That's the maximum we can do without unacceptable detection risk. We conducted covert nuclear tests every 3 months from 1994 through 1998. Small yields, deep burial, carefully timed to mask seismic signatures. And it worked. The substrate's growth rate stabilized, even decreased slightly. But there were complications. In September 1996, a seismology grad student at University of Nevada, Las Vegas noticed unusual patterns in regional seismic data. Low-magnitude events occurring at regular intervals, always from the same general area. She published a paper suggesting possible undisclosed testing at the Nevada test site. The paper was immediately classified. The student was offered a government job with a generous salary and non-disclosure agreement. She accepted. The paper was buried. But it was a warning. We were leaving traces. And eventually someone would notice who couldn't be silenced with job offers. In December 1997, something changed. The substrate stopped responding to our tests. We detonated a 600-ton device, our largest since the program started, and the growth didn't slow. In fact, it accelerated. "It's adapted," Kane said, staring at the monitoring data in disbelief. "The substrate has adapted to small yield tests. It's not satisfied anymore. It wants more energy." "How is that possible?" I asked. "It's not biological. It's not conscious. How can it adapt?" "Because it's fundamental," Kane said. "It exists at the substrate level of reality. It doesn't think the way we think. But it responds to energy patterns, and we've been feeding it the same pattern. Small yields, regular intervals, for 4 years. It's learned that pattern, now it's rejecting it, demanding more." "How much more?" I asked. Kane ran calculations. "Multi-kiloton yields, the kind we can't hide, the kind that will definitely be detected." I reported to Wilson, explained the situation. The substrate was rejecting small yields. Expansion was accelerating again. We had maybe 10 years before it reached populated areas. "We need to resume full-scale testing," I said. "There's no other option." "That's not politically possible," Wilson said. "The international community would never accept it. We'd face sanctions, possibly military intervention. The political cost is too high." "And the cost of doing nothing?" Kane demanded. He'd joined the call, couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Letting the substrate reach Las Vegas, watching it consume a major city while we sit back and say, well, we couldn't resume testing because of political concerns." "I understand your frustration," Wilson said. "But my hands are tied. I can't authorize full-scale testing. The decision-makers won't accept it." "Then what do we do?" I asked. Wilson was quiet for a long time. Then, "There might be one option. It's experimental, it's never been tested, but theoretically, it could work." "What option?" Kane asked. "We don't feed it radiation. We starve it completely. No more tests, no more energy input. Force it into a dormant state." "That's insane," Kane said. "If we stop feeding it, it'll accelerate its expansion even faster. Seek out other energy sources. Initially, yes, but our models suggest that after a period of accelerated expansion, if it can't find sufficient energy, it might go dormant. Enter a kind of hibernation state to conserve resources." "And if it finds sufficient energy before going dormant?" I asked. "Like, say, a city full of power plants." "That's the risk," Wilson admitted. "But continuing to test isn't sustainable. We're running out of ways to hide the tests. Eventually, we'll be discovered, and the international consequences will be severe. This might be our only option." The decision was made at levels above Wilson, above me, above anyone I had direct access to. In January 1998, Operation Substrate was terminated. No more covert tests. The substrate would be monitored but no longer fed. "This is a mistake," Kane said. He was 73 now, should have retired years ago, but couldn't leave while the substrate was active. "We're gambling with millions of lives." "We're out of options," I said. If testing isn't sustainable and we can't develop alternative containment, then we should be evacuating, warning people, preparing for the worst. And tell them what? That something existing at the substrate level of reality is spreading beneath Nevada and might reach them in 8 years? That nuclear testing was the only thing keeping it contained? Nobody would believe us. Kane stared at the monitoring display showing the substrate's steady expansion. Then we watch, we document, and when it reaches Las Vegas, when the catastrophe happens, at least there'll be a record. At least someone will know what really happened. The substrate's expansion accelerated immediately after we stopped testing. 2 miles per year became 4, then 6. By 2000, it was expanding at 8 miles per year. And it was changing. The crystal formations were developing new structures, new patterns, like it was evolving, adapting to the lack of regular radiation input. It's becoming more efficient, Kane said during a monitoring session in September 2000, using ambient radiation more effectively, background cosmic rays, natural radioactive decay in the surrounding rock. It's learning to survive on less. Is that good? I asked. If it can sustain itself on ambient radiation, maybe it won't need to seek out power plants. Or it means it's preparing, building up reserves before making a push toward larger energy sources. In March 2003, the substrate reached the edge of the restricted test site boundary. For the first time since 1963, it was expanding into areas that weren't under complete federal control. BLM land, areas where ranchers had grazing permits, occasional hikers and off-roaders. We need to expand the restricted zone, I told Wilson during an emergency call. Create a larger buffer before it reaches areas with regular civilian activity. On what grounds? We can't tell people why we're restricting access. National security, environmental contamination from historical testing. Pick a reason. Already working on it. But Matthews, you need to understand. We're running out of space. The substrate is 40 miles from the nearest small town, 60 miles from Las Vegas. If we can't stop it, we need to start planning for the next phase. What next phase? Evacuation, relocation, massive population movement away from the impact zone. But that requires disclosure, requires telling people why they need to leave, and that's a decision I can't make alone. Dr. Kane died in November 2005. Heart attack, officially. He was 82, had spent 40 years studying the substrate, watching it grow, trying to stop what seemed increasingly unstoppable. At his memorial service, small, classified, attended only by people with appropriate clearances, his successor, Dr. Amanda Lee, pulled me aside. "Kane left you something," she said. She handed me a sealed envelope marked with my name in his handwriting. I opened it later in my quarters. Inside was a letter and a data drive. The letter read, "Matthews, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Good. I'm tired of watching this slow-motion catastrophe." The data drive contains everything. Every measurement, every test, every theoretical model we've developed about the substrate over 40 years. I've also included something else, a proposal for last resort containment that I never shared with Wilson or anyone else because it's too extreme. If the substrate reaches Las Vegas, if evacuation isn't possible, there's one option left. We can't feed it conventionally. We can't starve it. But we might be able to overload it. A massive energy spike. Not a nuclear test, something bigger. Something so energetically intense that the substrate can't absorb it fast enough. It would be like forcing someone to drink from a fire hose. The substrate feeds on energy, but there's a limit to how much it can process at once. The calculations are on the drive. The energy requirements are substantial. It would require resources and authorization I never had access to. But if you can make it happen, if you can convince someone to try it before millions of people are at risk, Do it. End this. One way or another. Robert Kane. I looked at the data. The calculations were insane. The energy requirements were massive. But theoretically, it could work. If I could convince someone with sufficient authority to authorize it, and if I could do it before the substrate reached Las Vegas. I had maybe 5 years, probably less. I spent 6 months analyzing Kane's proposal. The mathematics were elegant, the physics sound, but the practical requirements were staggering. To overload the substrate, to force more energy into it than it could absorb, we'd need to generate an energy spike equivalent to a 50 megaton nuclear detonation. Not an actual nuclear explosion, that would feed it. We needed pure electromagnetic energy, a massive, controlled discharge that would overwhelm its absorption capacity. The problem was that nothing like that existed. The most powerful electromagnetic pulse generators were in the kiloton range. We'd need something 50,000 times more powerful, unless we built it. In June 2006, I presented Kane's proposal to Wilson and a panel of people whose names I never learned. They listened to my briefing in a classified facility in Washington, D.C., reviewed the data, asked pointed questions about feasibility and risks. "This is essentially a directed energy weapon," one of them said. "An EMP device on a scale never attempted before." "It's a containment tool," I corrected. "Designed to overload and potentially neutralize the substrate before it reaches population centers." "And if it fails?" another asked. "Then the substrate continues spreading. Reaches Las Vegas within 3 to 5 years, and we have no plan B." They deliberated for 3 hours. I waited outside the briefing room, watching armed guards patrol corridors that didn't officially exist. Wilson finally emerged. "They've authorized a feasibility study. 6 months, limited budget. If you can demonstrate the concept works on a small scale, they'll consider full implementation." "And if the substrate reaches Las Vegas before we can build it?" I asked. "Then we evacuate. Blame it on environmental contamination, industrial accident, whatever cover story we can sell. Move 2 million people away from the fastest growing metropolitan area in America and hope nobody asks too many questions." The feasibility study took place at a remote section of the Nevada test site, far from any monitoring stations or civilian access. We built a scaled-down version of Kane's design, a massive capacitor bank capable of generating a terawatt electromagnetic pulse. The test target was a small substrate sample we'd extracted from the main formation, about the size of a basketball, contained in a specially designed chamber that prevented it from reconnecting to the primary growth. "If this works," Dr. Lee said as we prepared for the test, "the pulse should overload the sample's absorption capacity, force it into a kind of energetic seizure where it can't process input fast enough." "And if it doesn't work?" I asked. "Then we've just energized it, made it stronger. And we'll know Kane's theory was wrong." We initiated the pulse at exactly 3:47 a.m. on December 12, 2006. 1 terawatt of electromagnetic energy dumped into the substrate sample in less than a microsecond. The sample exploded, not with physical force, with light. Pure, intense light that overloaded every sensor in the chamber. When the discharge cleared, the sample was gone, completely disintegrated. Not absorbed, not transformed. Gone. "It worked," Lee said, staring at the empty chamber. "We overloaded it, forced more energy in than it could process. It essentially tore itself apart trying to absorb too much at once." "Can we scale it up?" Wilson asked. He'd flown in to observe the test personally. "Theoretically, yes," Lee said. "But the power requirements for the full-scale system would be enormous. We'd need to build the largest capacitor bank ever constructed, and we'd need a power source capable of charging it. How much power? Wilson asked. Lee ran calculations. Gigawatts. We'd essentially need to divert the entire output of a major power plant for several hours to charge the system. Hoover Dam, I said. It generates 4 billion kilowatt hours annually. Could we use that? Lee looked at me. You want to divert power from Hoover Dam to charge a weapon aimed at an interdimensional growth threatening Las Vegas? The irony is almost poetic. Can it be done? Wilson asked. With appropriate approvals and infrastructure modifications, yes. We'd need to build transmission lines from the dam to the test site. Install the capacitor bank. Probably take 2 years of construction. Wilson pulled out his secure phone. I'll get you the approvals. Start planning immediately. We have 3 years, maybe less, before the substrate reaches urban areas. Construction began in January 2007. The project was classified under multiple layers of cover stories: power grid modernization, renewable energy research, experimental transmission systems. Millions of dollars in black budget funding, all officially allocated to programs that didn't exist. We built the capacitor bank in sections, underground, in a facility that had previously been used for nuclear weapons assembly. The system was massive, 33 separate capacitor modules, each one the size of a shipping container, all linked together in a network that could store and discharge 50 terawatts of electromagnetic energy. The transmission lines from Hoover Dam were disguised as standard power infrastructure upgrades. We told local utilities it was grid stabilization, told environmental groups it was renewable energy integration, told curious citizens it was classified defense research. Everyone believed what they wanted to believe. By October 2008, we were ready. The system was built, tested on small scales, verified to be functional. All we needed was final authorization to activate it. And that's when the substrate accelerated again. In November 2008, monitoring data showed a dramatic change. The substrate's expansion rate had suddenly jumped from 8 miles per year to 15 miles per year. And the growth pattern had shifted. Instead of spreading uniformly in all directions, it was now pushing specifically toward the southeast, toward Las Vegas. It knows, Dr. Lee said during an emergency briefing. Somehow, it senses the concentration of energy in Las Vegas. The power plants, the electrical grid, millions of devices all consuming energy, and it's orienting toward that. How fast will it reach the city? Wilson asked. At current expansion rate, 18 months. Maybe less if it continues accelerating. Then we activate the overload system now, I said. We can't wait for more approvals or better timing. If we don't stop it immediately, we lose our chance. Wilson made calls. Consulted with decision makers I'd never meet. Came back with authorization 2 days later. You have go approval, he said. Activate the system. Stop the substrate. And pray this works. We scheduled the activation for December 17, 2008. Required coordination with Hoover Dam operators, who were told this was a critical grid stability test. They'd divert maximum output for 6 hours while we charged the capacitor bank. The night before activation, I stood in the underground facility, looking at the massive capacitor modules that represented our last hope. Dr. Lee joined me. Nervous? She asked. Terrified. If this doesn't work, if we just make it stronger instead of destroying it, then 2 million people are at risk, and we'll have accelerated the timeline to catastrophe. She paused. But if we do nothing, the outcome is the same. At least this way we're trying. Cain would have appreciated that, I said, dying while trying instead of watching passively. He did appreciate it. That's why he left you the proposal. He knew you'd actually attempt it. December 17, 2008. 3 a.m. The system began charging. Power flowed from Hoover Dam through newly constructed transmission lines, feeding into the capacitor bank. Gigawatts of electricity slowly building up, preparing for a release that would last microseconds but deliver enough energy to rival a nuclear explosion. 6 hours of charging, 6 hours of watching gauges climb, monitoring systems strain, hoping nothing failed before we reached full capacity. At 9 a.m., we hit target charge, 50 terawatts stored in the capacitor bank, ready for release. Targeting confirmed, Lee said. She'd positioned the discharge array to aim directly at the center of the substrate formation 40 miles beneath us. All systems green. Ready on your order. I looked at Wilson. He nodded. Activate, I said. Lee pressed the trigger. 50 terawatts of electromagnetic energy discharged in 0.8 microseconds. The pulse traveled through rock and soil, through layers of earth, directly into the heart of the substrate formation. Every monitor in the facility went dark, not from the pulse, from what happened to the substrate. The monitoring systems we'd had embedded in the formation all went offline simultaneously. Seismographs showed a massive shock wave radiating from the substrate's location. And then, nothing. Silence. No readings, no data, no indication of what had happened. Did it work? Wilson asked. I don't know, Lee said. All our sensors are dead. We'll need to drill down, take physical samples, verify if the substrate is still there. It took 3 weeks to drill down to where the substrate formation had been. What we found was complicated. The substrate hadn't been destroyed, not completely, but it had been fundamentally changed. The crystal formations were still there, but they were dormant, inert, no longer growing, no longer glowing, no longer absorbing energy, like we'd burned out its ability to feed. It's hibernating, Lee said after analyzing the samples. The overload forced it into a shutdown state, probably to prevent self-destruction. It's still there, still technically active, but it's not expanding, not seeking energy, just existing. For how long? Wilson asked. Unknown, maybe permanently. Maybe it'll wake up tomorrow. We'll need to maintain monitoring indefinitely. Can it recover? I asked. Can it eventually wake up and resume expansion? Lee ran more tests. Possibly. If it's exposed to sufficient energy again. If something triggers its feeding mechanisms. But right now, it's stable, not a threat. I stayed at the Nevada test site for another 2 years, monitoring the dormant substrate, making sure the shutdown held. In 2010, I retired from the CIA. 52 years old, 30 years of service, most of it spent on a threat nobody could acknowledge. Dr. Lee took over as the primary researcher. She maintains the monitoring systems, checks the substrate's status weekly, prepares for the possibility that it might wake up. So far, it hasn't. 15 years of dormancy. 15 years of silence from something that had been growing for 47 years. But I still watch, still monitor the reports, still wait for the news that the substrate has reactivated. Because I know the truth. We didn't destroy it. We paused it. Put it to sleep. And eventually, something might wake it up again. I'm 66 years old now, living in a small town in Arizona, nominally retired but still consulting for programs that officially don't exist. And I'm writing this because the public deserves to know what's beneath Nevada. What we created with decades of nuclear testing. What we've been fighting to contain for 60 years. The Nevada test site conducted 928 nuclear tests between 1951 and 1992. Everyone knows that. What they don't know is that those tests cracked open something fundamental. exposed a layer of reality that should have stayed hidden, created a problem that we're still managing, still containing, still hoping doesn't become catastrophic. The substrate is dormant now, but dormant isn't dead. And as Las Vegas continues growing, continues expanding toward the test site boundary, continues building power plants and electrical infrastructure, the risk remains. The threat hasn't ended. We just bought time. In 2019, I got a call from Dr. Lee. She detected something concerning in the monitoring data. The substrate is showing signs of activity, she said. Very slight, barely detectable, but it's responding to something. What's causing it? I asked. We think it's solar activity. Major solar flare last week generated a massive geomagnetic storm. The substrate appears to have absorbed some of that energy. Is it waking up? Not yet, but it's stirring. Like it's testing whether conditions are right to resume feeding. What happens if there's another major solar event? Another geomagnetic storm? Lee was quiet. Then we might need to activate the overload system again, assuming it still works after 15 years of inactivity. And if it doesn't work, I asked, then we're back where we were in 2008, watching the substrate expand toward Las Vegas with no way to stop it. I'm writing this in December 2024. The substrate remains dormant, but increasingly fragile. Solar activity is intensifying as we approach solar maximum in 2025. Every major geomagnetic storm risks triggering a reactivation. Las Vegas has grown from 1.5 million people in 2008 to over 2.8 million today. The city continues expanding southeast toward the test site, toward the dormant substrate. If it wakes up, if it resumes spreading, millions are at risk, and nobody knows. The tourists gambling on the Strip, the families living in suburban neighborhoods, the workers commuting daily through the desert. None of them know what's beneath them. What we fed with nuclear tests for 40 years. What we barely stopped from consuming their city. The Nevada test site is still there, still restricted, still classified. You can take tours of a small section, see some craters, learn some sanitized history. But the real facility, the deep underground sections, the monitoring stations watching the dormant substrate, those you'll never see. Those remain classified, hidden, denied. If you've ever visited Las Vegas, if you've driven through the Nevada desert, you've been within miles of the substrate. You've passed over it without knowing, spent nights sleeping above it, lived your life unaware that something exists beneath Nevada that shouldn't exist anywhere on Earth. And maybe that's better. Maybe people are happier not knowing what we accidentally exposed with our nuclear testing, what we've been containing for 60 years, what still threatens them even now, dormant but not dead. But someone needs to know. Someone needs to have the full story. Because if the substrate wakes up, if our containment fails, if the overload system doesn't work a second time, Las Vegas won't know what hit them. They'll experience power failures, infrastructure collapse, and ground instability. And nobody will be able to explain why because the truth is classified. So, this is my testimony, my warning, my gift to people who deserve to know what's really beneath the Nevada desert. The Nevada test site isn't famous like Area 51. It doesn't have the same mystique, the same conspiracy theories. Everyone talks about aliens at Area 51. Nobody talks about what we found at the test site, which is exactly how the government wants it. Let people speculate about extraterrestrial spacecraft. Let them focus on Roswell and UFOs and little green men, as long as they're not thinking about what nuclear testing actually exposed. What we've been fighting to contain since 1963. The truth about Nevada isn't aliens from space. It's something from beneath our reality, something we cracked through to with our bombs, something that wants to feed on our energy. And it's still there, sleeping, waiting. I don't know how long the dormancy will hold. I don't know if solar activity will trigger reactivation. I don't know if we'll need to overload it again. What I do know is this: nuclear testing wasn't just about weapons. It was about containing what those weapons exposed. And the moratorium wasn't about peace or environmental concerns. It was about stopping the feeding before we made the problem worse. But we can't test anymore. Can't feed it. Can only watch and wait and hope it stays asleep long enough for someone smarter to find a permanent solution. Or until Las Vegas becomes the catastrophe we've been trying to prevent for 60 years. The Strip is 45 miles from the test site boundary. The Substrate, when we forced it dormant in 2008, had expanded to within 55 miles of Las Vegas suburbs. 10 miles of safety margin. 10 miles between dormant Substrate and the fastest-growing city in America. If it wakes up, if it starts spreading again at the rate it was in 2008, 15 miles per year. It would reach Las Vegas in 8 months. That's why Dr. Lee monitors it constantly. That's why the overload system remains on standby. That's why retired officers like me still watch the reports, still wait for the call that says our worst fears are coming true. Because the Substrate is patient. It exists at a fundamental level of reality, where time means something different. It can wait decades, centuries, millennia. Eventually, conditions will be right. Eventually, it will wake. And when it does, we'll find out if the overload system still works. If we can force it back to sleep. If we can protect millions of people from a threat they don't know exists. This is my final testimony. My warning to anyone who will listen. My documentation of what really happened at the Nevada test site between 1951 and now. The nuclear testing wasn't the real story. The Substrate was, is, will be. And it's still down there. Beneath the desert. Beneath the casinos. Beneath the suburban neighborhoods where families sleep peacefully, unaware of what lies beneath them. Sleep well, Las Vegas, but sleep lightly, because what dreams beneath you is ancient, patient, and hungry, and someday it will wake. My name is Zoey Matthews. I was a CIA officer stationed at the Nevada test site. We weren't testing nuclear weapons. We were feeding something that should never have been awakened, and I'm terrified that we haven't truly stopped it, only delayed it. This is the truth about Nevada. This is what lies beneath the Strip, beneath the desert, beneath the foundation of our reality. And now you know.